Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of Hodges Heroes, where we are making the most of our mess. My name is Doug. This is my wife, Janan, and our chief qualification to be able to have this conversation is that we got a mess that we're making the most of.
No joke.
So, last time we talked about that concept of what do you do when you just start to realize something's kind of not right,
Mhm.
something's off. And we kind of ended up with saying, okay, you kind of got to the point where maybe you've gone to the pediatrician, you've gone to the school, and maybe the school or the doctor are telling you, okay, we got to take it to the next step. So, Janan, tell us a little bit about, from a school perspective, what that kind of looks like.
So, if let's say you're the teacher of your child, or guidance counselor, or assistant principal, or any type of the academic team at your child's school comes to you and says, "Listen, your child's performing below grade level, or we're seeing some different things going on with focus or concentration." The one thing I typically have told people to do is talk to the pediatrician. I know we referenced that a little bit in our first episode about, there's different inventories you can fill out. The pediatrician can talk you through, what is typical child development. But one thing that you can do is not just support your child at home academically, but there are some questions that you can ask of the teacher and of the school staff. One thing, if you want some more clarification, you can ask for a conference just to touch base about what's happening with your child. If you go to the Florida Department of Education, again, if you're a Florida public school family, there is a process called MTSS. And if you, again, go to fldoe.com and you type in MTSS, it is the multi-tiered system of supports. It gives you the breakdown of what exactly that is. Every student in the public school system, what they're getting in their typical academic classroom is considered tier 1 instruction. That's the core instruction. That's what the teacher is teaching in a whole group setting, where the teacher might be standing around the classroom teaching the content area, might be doing small groups, different things like that. That is what everyone gets academically, behaviorally. But then when you realize if maybe your child is struggling and the teacher says, "Hey, they need to move to tier 2 to get some more interventions," or "We need to give them a little bit more support." Tier 2 is more frequency and in a smaller group setting. And then it goes on for a matter of weeks. It's usually, it is an approved intervention resource. And so it's something that's research based and obviously is credible. And then every week or two, there is a data point taken. And a data point, I explain that to people, it's kind of like a score on a test. Now, this doesn't count for their grades or anything, but basically this data point shows how well the child did on that particular activity in comparison to the small group of students that he or she is with. Over time, if that is your child is still below grade level in this tier 2 intervention, because tier 2 is basically one grade level below intervention, then a child could be moved to a tier 3 intervention group, which is typically 2 or more grade levels below, in a small group setting several times a week using an approved intervention resource. If you want to read up on that, that is a great explanation of that is on that website.
And if that just sounded like the teacher on Peanuts from you talking and a
Wah,
lot of wah
wah, wah,
wah wah wah
wah.
wah wah, don't you're
Yeah.
not alone, because it's complicated stuff.
Yeah.
And unless you are in that field, and I mean, the school system seems like they just get excited about creating new acronyms. So
We
much
do.
so that there's actually a page on the Florida Department or Florida Education Department's website devoted just to the acronyms that are created, and it's like long, like
Yeah.
even people that are in the system don't even know all about it.
I will say this, Doug, too. If you're watching this and your child is in private school, or your child's in another state or another country, I'm sure you can go online to find what your state has available to you, because it might be similar processes but with different names. So that is one thing that in the Florida public school system, which I am a part of, that's typically how we navigate that. Now, Doug, I want to pivot to you for just a minute and talk about with Tyler, our child. His first rodeo wasn't from a teacher saying, "Hey, our child's struggling." Talk a little bit about how our situation started with him getting more support.
So we worked it out with, I mean, we started the process with a pediatrician. He was, 2, 3 years old. It was, various things that, you know, from sleep apnea, which we talked about last time, tonsils and adenoids. There was just a number of things which were, the
Eyes,
nystagmus
yeah.
that was a part of it that we, found out had the potential to have neurological concerns associated with it. So there was a lot of unknowns, a lot of things we were just, kind of flying by the seat of our pants, trying to figure it all out.
Mhm.
Uh, but we worked through the process through our state. What was it called? Child Find? Is that what it was?
Child find. Hmm.
And we kind of worked through those state resources, and he was able to qualify for a special VPK program that actually started was actually at the public school, and it was he started when he was 3 years old, going full time in a school environment with some dedicated intervention from some really great teachers that gave him some resources and help that he needed.
So a little backstory there. So VPK, another acronym, is Voluntary Pre-Kindergarten Program. That typically is the age of 4. So some of you might have benefited from a free kindergarten program that usually takes place at a public school. For Tyler,
They can take place anywhere. I mean,
yeah,
there's public
it
school,
can. You're
churches,
right. You're right.
wherever.
It can, but it's funded through the
If you're
state.
out at the back of a 7-Eleven, that's probably not a VPK program, and you should probably not go there.
But
I'm
they
just
do have
saying.
good Slurpees.
They do. Slurpees and candy bars.
They do. But for our Tyler,
Somebody rolls up in a van that says VPK, no windows on it. Don't put your kid in there. I'm just saying.
fair point. Well, for Tyler, he qualified through this child find, and what ended up happening, he started school at the age of 3, and we were living in North Florida at the time, and the VPK program, or not VPK, VPK is 4-year-olds. It was an ESC pre-K program. ESC stands for Exceptional Student Education, basically special education. And so what that meant is he was able to start school at the age of 3. Right, he actually had his tonsil adenoid ectomy. He had recovery for a week or two, and then started, in August in a 3-year-old program. At that point, the school where he attended, which was our local elementary school, it was a 4-day-a-week program. Some programs go 5 days a week. Some go 2 or 3 days a week. It just depends on where you are. But for him, they had to write him an IEP. Doug, do you know what IEP stands for?
Individualized education plan.
And do you know what an individualized education plan is?
Do I know what it
Yes.
is? Yes, I do know what it is because I've sat in umpteen meetings with 4,000 acronyms and looked like a fool 4 or 5 times
No, you
saying,
didn't.
please tell me what this is without using acronyms. And they couldn't do it, to be honest with you. 1 or 2 of them had to well, I don't know what the real word is, kind of stuff.
So an IEP, individualized education plan, is basically a plan for your child that's going to tackle his or her deficits. So when Tyler was 3, or if your child is in an ESC, pre-kindergarten program, basically they typically have I don't like to say the word label, but I don't even know what the right word is right now because my brain's having a moment, but the exceptionality, that's the word, of DD and LI. DD stands for developmentally delayed, and LI stands for language impaired. So Tyler was entering 3-year-old special education class with developmentally delayed, which was accurate, and language impaired. For him, when he was in that program, they had speech therapy during the day, and amazing teachers who we're actually still friends with, and Tyler actually still calls on the phone. And it was really great because it gave him that pre-K experience, but also gave him some isolated help, which honestly, the goal of that program would be to get kids who are having some developmental delays, get them some support early on. So when they start kindergarten, ideally they would be out of that
That's really
special
the
education
goal of
program.
any IEP.
Well, true.
All IEPs
Yeah.
are designed to kind of
Meet them where they are.
work their way out to the point where your child is on grade level and doesn't need the individualized plan.
Sure, but that didn't happen for us. Our child is 18.
Some can do that,
But
some can't.
right, and our child is 18, and he's going into his senior year this fall, and he still has an IEP, and he still
And
has.
we meet once a year or better
Yeah.
on updating it and working through it and that kind of stuff.
Sure. Now, if you are a parent, and we talked earlier about if your child is in, let's say, 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, and you realize they're below grade level, I mentioned that MTSS process that you can find online, multi-tiered system of supports. That's kind of the precursor of possibly your child qualifying for special education services. Now, if your child is receiving tier 2 reading services, don't fret like, oh my goodness, they're going to be in special education. Not necessarily. The goal of that program is to, hey, let's get them the intervention that they need, and then let's get them back up to grade level. And then, hey, they're back on tier 1 core instruction, we're good to go. But if we see those deficits over time, that would be kind of the structure that would get someone to get evaluated and different things like that. So that's kind of the process depending on where you are in the program.
So that's some of the school-based stuff
Sure.
that might come in. I want to take a minute and kind of talk about some of the psychological,
Mm,
counseling,
mm,
social skill, some of the additional support you might get under a medical model, so to speak. So your pediatrician, yeah, there's some things medicines that can be prescribed for things like ADHD that can help, improve focus. I talk to a lot of parents say, I don't want to put my kids on meds. That's just what, and to the point that I would say is if your kid needed glasses, would you say, I don't want to give my kids glasses, just going to make them dependent on glasses the rest of their life? Like, make them squint. No, you get your kid glasses and let them, be able to see things so that they can function and work. If your kid has ADHD and medication can help them, then consider it.
yeah.
Have the conversation with your pediatrician. Medications are not right for everybody,
Correct.
and not all medications are created equal,
Oh, for
and not
sure.
all kids
Whew.
respond to medications in the same way. So that's the conversation you want to be able to have. And I will tell you from my experience that typically a pediatrician will start with one medication if we're talking specifically for things like ADHD. Same would also be true for things like depression and anxiety, but that's typically not all the way diagnosed at this age that we're talking about, but ADHD is. And then if that one medication does not work, typically the pediatrician is going to want to refer you to a specialist.
So, on that note, in terms of medication, people have different beliefs, on that type of thing. For us, we did not go full into zero to, oh, we're medicating our 6-year-old, right? He was in school. I remember in kindergarten for him, and again, being a teacher, I kind of know some of the signs. Every time he'd get a report card or a test back, F. Excuse me. I'm not getting choked up. I just have a little cough. Excuse me. But he was failing. And I'm crying because I'm like, my child is failing kindergarten. Now, this is him with getting special education services. He was getting service by another teacher. He was getting core instruction, and he had a quality teachers and staff. But I was called in one day for a conference with his kindergarten teacher, who I adore and I'm still friends with, and for his assistant principal, who I also love, who ended up becoming my boss as a principal years later when I started working at Tyler School. And they basically said, look, he's having trouble with focus. And honestly, I wasn't surprised. I don't know if you were. I know you weren't in that meeting at that time, but I even knew at the age of 1 and 2, I remember thinking this child will be diagnosed with ADHD, 100%. I was working with him every day. I was living with him every day. Doug, I would leave him, and you were working at this point. I don't even know if I ever told you this, but I would go take a shower. I would leave him in his room with his little gate, and I would come back, and his room was destroyed. Every shirt out of his closet on the floor, every toy, and he would just stand there and smile at me. And then for the next hour, I'd have to clean the room. So for us, we didn't go straight into meds. I looked at some gluten. We tried to do gluten-free for a little bit. It didn't make a difference. We looked at red dyes. Didn't make a difference. Sorry for the music in the background because we have a child playing music because they live here. So there were some other dietary things that people have tried and seen success with. Can you expand on
Yeah,
any of that?
if it works, it works,
Right.
and that's kind of like we talked about in the previous episodes is if it's working for you and you're your kid's expert, you know what they're capable of.
Right.
If you give them a food and they get jacked up like 30 minutes later after it gets digested, okay, there might be a food allergy issue going on. And that's something you want to, take advantage of and look at.
Also, too, I know as a teacher, when I have had some students that might be struggling with focus, they might not have an ADHD diagnosis, but they've been off for a bit and their concentration is low. Usually, some of my questions are, hey, what time does your child go to bed? Honestly, like, and Doug, I know you talk a lot about sleep hygiene in your field in therapy. I mean, sleep and structure, having a consistent bedtime most of the nights, making sure they're
Well, we
getting.
don't believe in creating bedtimes for our children. They should be able to know and have the freedom to go to sleep. No, that's junk. Your kid needs like 10 hours of sleep a night.
I need a bedtime. Are you kidding me? I can't thrive on just going to bed, whatever. So I do think a good sleep hygiene. Can you expound a little bit on that because you're the expert in that category?
Sleep hygiene is an all day topic. It's not just something that you have right before bedtime, it's things that you do all day long. It has to do with, when you wake up in the morning, getting things bright so that your brain can start working, you start just waking up and refreshing. Uh, the time of day in which you consume things like coffee or things
Mm-hmm.
with caffeine,
Mm-hmm.
or if your kids, hitting 5 hour energy drinks at 9 p.m., you don't know why they can't sleep at night. Well, because they had a Mountain Dew 10 minutes ago, they
Right.
can't sleep. So those are things. Exercise, you go in and you get a kid all jacked up, 30 minutes before bed and expect them to go to sleep. Like, well, that just doesn't work for most kids. Their brains now, excited and engaged, and they're ready to go do something else. When you're, excited and wanting to go, go to sleep, they're ready to go. They got another win. They got another round into them.
Well, and even like screen time, I know even when
Yeah,
I taught
taking
elementary,
screens out 30
same
minutes
thing,
before you go to bed,
if
turning
not more.
TVs off, turning phones off, lighting, making sure it's a little bit more dim. You don't have bright overhead lights
Sure.
off, then all of a sudden you just turn all the lights off. Of course, no, your body needs some time to kind of go into a sleep mode, basically.
I know even in the school system, I've even recommended, reading with your child before bed, or having your child read something that's like not stimulating, like you said, with the brightness
But
or the
not like a
noise.
graphic horror novel
No,
with
that
your
would not be
kids.
advised.
That's gonna create other
Right.
traumas in life for them.
Right. But even like, I know you've talked before, like about a bath or a shower, like
Yeah.
that can soothe as
It
well.
it cools your body down. Your body likes to go to sleep when it's in a cooling mode. So if you take a bath, you're going to raise your body temperature just to not like get a fever body temperature,
Right.
but it's going to raise it a little bit. And as you get out of the bath, you're going to start to cool down. As you start to cool down, that's kind of your body's time in which it goes to sleep.
Sure.
Maybe it's hot in your house. Crank the air down 1 or 2 degrees, or put
Right.
a fan in the room. That might help cool things down just a little bit to be able to help your kid get to sleep a little bit better.
Sure.
And don't be in the other room with the TV on high while
Right.
your kid's trying to sleep, because doesn't create darkness. Maybe you got a street light outside and it's super bright outside. Get some blackout windows. Make it so that,
Yeah.
the environment's conducive for sleep.
Those curtains definitely help. Yeah. So, I mean, so again, if you're hearing buzzwords of focus and different things, I think you start at the ground level. Like, let's not go 0 to 100. We're not going to go start meds. We're not going to, okay, what are we doing at home
But
organically?
I will tell you this, though, if you were trying to get an appointment with a medical provider that's a specialist, you want to get that appointment now.
That's true.
And the reason I say that is, depending on what market you're in and what's available to you, it's changed a lot since COVID, because so many people have availability through telehealth. But at one point in time, we're talking a 6 to 9 month wait list
Yeah.
to be able to get an appointment with a professional. And what I would tell people from my perspective as a therapist is, hey, get the appointment now. And if things get drastically better in 2 weeks, okay, then cancel the appointment.
Sure.
As long as you cancel within like 24, 48, 36 hours, whatever the company's, policy is, they're not going to charge you for anything, but you got an appointment. And sometimes that's half the battle, is working through the process with insurance or whatever else you're going to do just to get the appointment.
Sure.
So you want to get the appointment, and you might say, who do we get the appointment with? Okay, well, I was in grad school before I realized the difference between a psychologist, a psychiatrist, and a psychotherapist. They sound like all the same words, but they do vastly different things. A psychotherapist, which is what I am, basically does counseling. We talk you through things, we help you work through issues, we can give you some social skill type work to do. That's psychotherapist. Psychologists, they're primarily doing testing. Now, some psychologists can also offer therapy as well as, but most don't. They're going to work through the testing side of things. And when I say testing, they're going to go through very standardized tests that have strict rules as to how they can and can't be administered. A lot of times there's 3 and 4 hours worth of testing that you have to do. And their main job is to help you get a diagnosis. So if you are trying to get an initial diagnosis, that might not be a bad place to start, but I will tell you that the psychologist is going to be expensive, because most of the time they're not covered by insurance. You typically have to work your way into a psychologist versus being able to that be your first on-ramp. A psychiatrist is the one that's a medical doctor or a nurse practitioner. You can go to a psychiatric nurse practitioner. They're going to be the ones writing medication scripts. And so in an ideal world, you'd love to be able to be a part of a practice where you have access to all three of those and they all work together. If that works, great. They can all talk to one another. They can all work from the same chart. They can, what I would do is, as a psychotherapist, if one of my patients went to a psychologist and got testing, I'm reading the psychologist reports. I'm looking through some of the recommendations of the psychologist. We're working with finding a really accurate diagnosis. Then that helps you create a treatment plan to be able to say, all right, how are we going to help this person improve? What are some of the symptoms that they have? What are some of the ways we're going to help them improve? Sometimes that might be with things like we're talking about, improving sleep hygiene. Maybe there's some parental education that goes along with that. Sometimes that might be with what we call compensatory skills. How do we help you compensate for things that just don't come naturally for you?
Mhm.
And maybe like for ADHD, you might learn to write things down. You might learn to have a routine in place, a
Checklists.
checklist of things. The keys always go in the same spot.
That's me.
Uh,
But even when our kids were little and Tyler first had his diagnosis of ADHD, I remember you created or built a wall unit to where the boys had hooks. So when they came in through the garage, they got their backpack, they got their binder out so we could sign it and look at homework. They put their shoes up. And honestly, that is so very helpful to have a spot and location where everything is managed.
Yeah, so those types of things it might not be it's not going to magically cure things like ADHD or
Correct.
autism or whatever the case might be, but it's some things that help you get a little bit further down the road.
Right.
Help you have one less, phone that gets lost, or one less backpack that gets misplaced,
Yes.
or shoe that you can't find, or whatever the case might be. Which honestly, this day we have looked for 3 phones in the course of the house.
And honestly, if we were to add up the amount of hours that we have spent
I think
raising
it goes into
children,
years at this
years
point.
we have trying to leave the house and we're looking for X, Y, Z.
There's a substantial portion of my adult life has been trying to find things that I haven't lost. But anyhow,
And waiting on people. Your favorite
bitter
things.
party of one. Anyhow, I got to.
I do want to say something as we were talking about, what do you do if your child, you realize something's going on or you get a report from school. I will say this, like what Doug was talking about or Doug, what you were saying about a psychologist with testing. I will say in the public school sector and in the private sector, psychologists are vastly different roles. So you might have a school psychologist, they have different credentials than a psychologist will if you were to
Yeah,
hire
there's certain tests that
privately.
the school is able to administer that don't require the same level of education
Certification.
and
Yeah.
credentialing as what would a psychologist has a PhD or a PsyD. They have a doctorate degree.
Right.
They have to be licensed with the state, and there's a whole process you go to internships and hospitals, the whole 9 yards. It's a really big. That's why they're so expensive. It's a long time to get that credentialing.
Where a school psychologist does not have, again, different certifications, but just for different needs.
And there's some of those tests that you need for other things. So for
Correct.
example, things like ABA therapy. Your insurance company is going to require testing of a certain level in order to be able to qualify for some of those services. So that's some of the intricacies you might want to work out. That's where having a conversation with a therapist or even your doctor or some of these places or a social worker or whoever that might be, they can give you some of the insight as to what types of testing you're going to need, who needs to deliver those tests, and how
Correct.
that kind of works out.
I do want to say on this note, we talked about the multi-tiered system of supports and, what do you do, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, all those different things. I will say this, if you realize that your child has need and your child is in the public school system, but you decide to go privately to hire a psychologist, get the testing, and you get paperwork and a diagnosis or an exceptionality, you can take that paperwork into the school system. Usually you would contact your guidance counselor and say, hey, listen, my child just got diagnosed with X, Y, and Z. I have this paperwork. What can I do to get him or her some support in the school system? Also, there's a thing called a 504 plan. I know with certain changes in the United States of America right now, people are saying, oh, certain things might exist or might change. At this point, nothing has changed in terms of this realm. And even if it does change, it just might be named something differently moving on. Also, one more thing as we finish this episode. If you decide to go the route for medication, please know that the first medication might not work, and it did not with us, and it was awful for a few months. And to where, Doug, we were like, if it's either this or us to say a functional family unit, he's got to get off these meds because it was wreaking havoc. So just know that just
And
because
there was nothing wrong with the meds. We have friends that take that exact same
Yes.
meds, and they talk about it being a miracle
Perfect.
drug. Like,
Yes.
man, my child went from from light to dark or dark to light.
Right,
Like
right.
it was, it was great. And and that's with everyone. Those medications,
Sure.
they're going to react a little bit differently to you, and especially when you start talking about things like autism. That's a sensitivity issue with autism, and sometimes you're way more sensitive to medications than other people
Correct.
And so, a prescriber that's really well versed in autism is going to start you on the absolute like half of the lowest dose possible, and kind of work the way up slowly through things in order to get you to a spot where, okay, this is doing what it's supposed to.
So we covered a lot of topics on episode 2. We hope to see you for episode 3, and we're going to talk a little bit about respite care as parents or taking some time for self-care.
All right. See you soon.